Well, hello. Sean Smith here with the Learning Research Network, or the LRN. And maybe I should say hello again. Welcome back. If you've welcomed back, you'll know this is one of a series of videos that we've put together to really think about struggling learners and those with disabilities in our Catholic schools and how we need to meaningfully plan or purposefully plan and design for the variability that exists in our learners. Now, for those of us that this is the first of the videos, please realize we have a couple videos that precede this that talk about variability in our classroom. In our Catholic schools today, variability, you may think, oh, sure, we're including more students with disabilities, Sean. And we are. We have potentially, depending upon your building, 12 to 20% of the students that you're serving may very well have an identified disability. But what I'm actually talking about with the variability is I'm talking about those struggling readers that will never be identified, and yet they'll read 2 to 3 grade levels below. Maybe they'll have difficulties with vocabulary or fluency or comprehension. Or it's those individuals with executive function challenges, organization, time management, and everything else that falls under that umbrella, executive functions. Or maybe it's the individual that has social competence challenges, or maybe anxiety. The list goes on. And yes, some of those individuals will be identified with a disability, but many of those individuals will have challenges, they'll have variability in their learning, and yet they will never be identified with a disability. Or let's add to that list, maybe students that come from a different socioeconomic background, or maybe increasingly what we're finding, families where children are coming that don't attend church regularly, or they attend church just on the holidays, or maybe they're spending time with mom versus dad, and so the dynamics of the family are different than what we've traditionally served. All that will offer variability in our classroom, and I would argue, as would many, that if we have variability in our classroom, then some of the things we've designed and planned for with this idea of typical may then present barriers. Now, it may be things that we've designed, but it also may be the environment we live in. So let's start off thinking about that environment and the barriers that might be presented due to the variability of our learners and that we need to design and plan around accordingly. So I think of this, and yes, this is a bit of an extreme picture, but not too many years ago we had COVID. And we needed to plan and design around masks, around social distancing, around cleanliness, around a number of different factors that really had nothing to do with learning, and yet due to the safety of the individuals, including ourselves, we had a number of environmental considerations that proved to be barriers in our learning. Now, you may say, well, okay, that's gone, Sean. We don't have to worry about that. And yet I'd say we've had to design around barriers for years for individuals with physical disabilities, be it a wheelchair or maybe a broken leg, or I'm on crutches with a soft cast for an ankle, or maybe it's I have a walker, whatever it may be. Now, we've designed and planned for that for years. Now, this image here is an excellent example of designing after the fact. If you see, there's a set of stairs far back in that picture, and now then we have this ramp. And the ramp was added, of course, for individuals with mobility and physical needs. And I would argue, and hopefully you're in a building where you're entering the building now, and yes, it's not a flat building, there's still some need to kind of go from the ground up into the building. I would hope that instead of a set of stairs and then off to the side, an extensive ramp, I would hope that they've been designed to blend in together. Maybe there's no stairs, maybe it's just a ramp for everybody to use, including individuals that need it due to their mobility devices. Or maybe it's a blending of stairs and the ramp, which again, from a design factor, you wouldn't even notice. And yet it's very much necessary and part of the fabric to be able to help that variability of the learner, and of course, the barriers associated with the environment. Whatever it may be, these things have been with us for years. Now, this is an image that you may be thinking, what do Ritz crackers and Peter Pan peanut butter have to do with anything, Sean, especially with barriers? Well, I'm one of 7. My dad was a school psychologist, and if I was lucky, he would go into work on Saturdays. And what I mean by that is if you went to work on Saturdays, maybe to score some tests or whatever he was doing, I got to go with him. So that was my alone time with my dad. But more importantly, he had a couple cabinets. Now, come to find out, I didn't go into that second cabinet. I should have. But the first cabinet had peanut butter and Ritz crackers. And being one of 7, Ritz crackers were not in the cupboard at the house. It was all saltines. Ritz crackers were too expensive, but so much better. And Peter Pan peanut butter, oh my goodness, we had the generic big old tub, and it tasted very different than Peter Pan. So I had Peter Pan with Ritz crackers. I was in heaven. Now, the second cabinet had Twinkies and all that, and I didn't ask, and I only found out about that later on. One thing I never asked my dad was, Dad, why do you have peanut butter and crackers in your cabinet? I enjoyed them. Later on I asked, well, Sean, I'm testing students all day. And many of them are coming, especially first in the morning, they didn't have breakfast. Or maybe they're coming and they had a limited lunch. They're hungry. That's going to impact the reliability and validity of my testing. That's a barrier. Of course it is. And of course, many things that we do today, we try to address maybe nutrition or that hangry or whatever it may be. But again, being hungry and coming into learning, that's going to be a bit of a barrier. But increasingly, where we see barriers are things like, for example, reading, literacy. Now, I made reference to the fact that, yes, we may have some students that struggle with reading, never be identified with a disability, but they very well may, throughout their entire academic career, be a grade or two level below in their vocabulary, fluency, comprehension. Now, those individuals, therefore, when it comes to a textbook, or what comes to what we begin doing, third grade on, where we're reading in order to learn, that's going to be a bit of a barrier. Now, depending upon the individual and depending upon their limitation when it comes to reading, that barrier may be a small one or a quite extensive one, but it's a barrier nonetheless. So how do we design and plan around that? Now, of course, if we're going to have difficulty with reading, we're going to have difficulty with writing. They go hand in hand. Right, in terms of limited word choice, in terms of the fluency of writing, idea generation, organization, and of course then the mechanics and grammar and all the things, spelling that goes along with it. So those individuals, writing as a challenge, very well may, the act of writing, the act of demonstrating what I know through writing might be a barrier. Now, I'm not saying we don't teach reading, nor do we ask students to read, and I'm not saying we don't teach writing, nor do we not ask students to write, but rather we need to appreciate the fact that if I have reading challenges, I'm going to have problems with that textbook, which was produced with this idea that there's a grade level reading typical. I'm fourth grade or fifth grade. It's at the fourth or fifth grade reading level, and yet I may not be there. The same with the writing. This idea that I want you to demonstrate what you know, so please write it out. Well, wait, writing is a deficit for me, so while I try to share with you what I know, writing becomes a bit of the barrier. Now, here's an image to have us thinking a little bit more. And I've used this before, and this is out of the video, How Difficult Can This Be? And the image itself is here to represent the idea that, okay, I believe that you should know what this picture is. And of course, many of us have seen what this picture represents. What's in this picture is something we've all very familiar with. We've probably seen it on the side of the road, depending upon where we live. I offer this as an example with the following. If I were to start instruction, let's say on a Wednesday, and Tuesday I said, please tonight read the following passage. Now, I'm expecting everyone to have read it. I'm expecting everyone to have understood what they read. And so Wednesday morning comes in, and I'm going to start applying and building upon what you read Tuesday night. Now, of course, I'm assuming everyone read it. So let's go with that. And you may be like, ha, 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 right, Sean, everyone read it. Well, let's assume they all read it. But the challenge is we have students that, with their variability, read below grade level. So they may have read it once, but they may have needed to read it several times, or they may need some assistance as they read it. And so they read it, but they're not understanding it. Then we have the student with a disability, let's say a learning disability or an intellectual disability, where they read it, but they didn't know how to break down the main idea. They didn't know how to break down and understand the key vocabulary. And it took them forever to read. They're very slow in terms of their fluency. So all that combined, they're coming into class Wednesday, and you're like, well, I gave the foundational information Tuesday night. Now we're going to go to town. I'm going to give you activities. I'm going to facilitate it. But a lot of those students, based on this reading barrier, do not understand this foundational knowledge. And maybe we don't realize this until 30 minutes into the lesson, or they finally make the connection 35 minutes into the lesson. Now, you've been looking at this image for a while, so I've given you some time. And my guess is more time is not going to help you on this one. You need some direct illustration here. So the image is what you see here. And that is, it's an image of a cow looking at you. Now, due to the potential lack of clarity through this video, I'm going to show you a real life picture. So it is a cow looking at you. So take a look at this. We'll back up here. There's the cow looking at you. Okay. And again, there's a real life picture. I hope I've given you a general understanding and gotten you thinking a little bit more about the fact that, yes, barriers exist. So in some ways, I hope you're drinking the Kool-Aid. Or maybe you're already drinking the Kool-Aid and maybe it will assist me in respect to making the Kool-Aid. Regardless, the idea here, though, is the fact that if variability exists, which it does, barriers are very likely, could be in the areas I've mentioned, and you could probably list another dozen areas where barriers may be associated with the material we use, the instructional strategies we use, the structure of the classroom, a host of things. Now, what do we often do for individuals, particularly with disabilities, or individuals there on the fringe? Well, oftentimes we'll offer accommodations. Now, you're like, accommodations, 100%, that's exactly what we do. And yet, when I think of accommodations, I think of my own son. I have a son, JJ, who just graduated from Creighton University, and he needed accommodations like extended time. He needed at times a quiet room and a host of other things. And as you know, there are lists and lists and lists of accommodations. I have a colleague, David Bateman, that's produced a list of accommodations, and I think it's about 25 pages of accommodations. Now, where am I going with this? Well, the reality is, with all the variability happening in our classroom, we've got a number of individuals that need accommodations. So if we think of these accommodations in a ball, let's say that we have a few ping pong balls, right? So we have a few students that need nothing major. They're lightweight, they're kind of small accommodations, and you tell me what they are, okay, on that list of 25 pages of accommodations. Not too intensive. So good. I'm juggling a few ping pong balls with 2 or 3 of my 25 plus students. All right. Well, then we have a couple other students, though, that need tennis balls, meaning that the accommodation requires it's a bit bigger. It's a bit harder to be able to facilitate or more solid. So now I've got my ping pong balls, I got my tennis balls. Now I maybe need a soccer ball or a beach ball or basketball size type of accommodation. Bigger, harder, it takes a little bit more time. But I'm juggling, remember, the ping pong ball, the tennis ball, and now these other bigger balls as well. Where I'm going with this is that, yes, accommodations can be very effective, but with this idea that we have a lot of variability, if we solve our problem through accommodations, we're going to go crazy. We can't juggle all those balls. Some balls are going to drop. We're going to get frustrated with the fact that we have to juggle all these balls. And we're basically designing one thing and then accommodating after the fact. Well, let's design from the get-go. We need to think outside the box. And thinking outside the box is essential in our next efforts. So what I ask us to do as you leave this session is reflect on some of the barriers in your own classroom. And you might start with some of the environmental ones. It might be the fact that the lighting's poor. It might be the fact that there's some noises on the other side. It might be the fact that your windows look, one, you don't have windows, or maybe your windows look over something outside that's very distracting. Could be a host of things there. Those are the low-hanging fruit. Then think of some of the materials, some of the resources that maybe the textbook is making you use, or maybe as a group you've decided to use, but you're not considering the variability that exists in your classroom. So do that, and then, if you would, join us for our next session when we start thinking about ways to plan and design right from the get-go very purposefully for this variability and not needing to add in the accommodations. Again, Sean Smith with the Learning Research Network. Hope this was helpful, and see you soon.